claim by US President Donald Trump that Iran wants to cut a deal has been denied by Tehran. I speak to US intelligence analyst, retired Colonel Chris Wyatt. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, Chris. Well, the first casualty of war is the truth. That's what they've always say. That old canard thrown out there. But I think it is true. The first casualty of war is the truth. And where's the truth here? I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know what Trump has to gain from this. Some U.S. analysts on the left side of the political spectrum claim it's because the economy is in trouble in America because of prices. But that's utter nonsense. I live in this country. I shop. I purchase. The only rising prices for the most part at this stage are the prices of petrol at the pump, but that's not unusual. The price of petrol swings up and down. And the summertime, as we get in spring, it tends to go up anyway. So it was going to rise, but not this much. It was going to rise because consumption goes up as people go on holiday starting in a few months from now. So that's just it's a red herring. But Trump did say he was holding negotiations with Tehran and suggested that the broader agreement could be reached. In fact, to quote him, he said, "We have had very, very strong talks. We'll see where they lead. We have points, major points of agreement. I'd say almost all points of agreement." And he said that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are conducting these talks to their Iranian counterparts. Now, I don't know where they're conducting them, if it's in Oman or it's in a hotel in Baghdad. I have no idea. He says, all I'm saying is we're in the throes of a real possibility of making a deal. But then, of course, Iran denies there's any negotiations taking place. They rejected the claims, saying the U.S. is trying to delay while they try to deploy more forces to the region. Well, I don't know what they're talking about. We have all the air assets and naval assets we need in the region. And now 22 countries have stepped up to participate in opening up the Strait of Hormuz. After all these countries arrogantly said, we're not getting involved, we don't want to play. 22 countries. And I think they realize that unless they get involved, their economies are going to collapse because some of these countries, like South Korea, 70% of their energy comes from the Gulf, and Japan, 95% of their energy. Of course, China gets a massive amount of fuel from there too. All these countries are in trouble now, and they realize it. It took them a while to wake up to that reality, but now they're backing off in 22 countries. But the Iranian officials rejected the claims. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and parliamentary leaders call the statements fake news and big lie. That's interesting because Trump's fake news line he always uses, they're calling Trump fake news. And they've accused U.S. of fabricating those claims so they can manipulate the oil and financial markets to buy time. Now, that's actually a more promising premise. I don't know that it's true, but at least there's some plausibility to it. That would be a reason for Trump to make these statements, just to buy time to stabilize the price of oil, because the stock market here in the U.S. surged 600 points yesterday on this news when it came out. And then we also saw that the South African rand initially collapsed, but then regained some ground when that news came out. So that could be possibly what's going on, but I really don't think it. I don't understand beyond that, because this is easy enough to prove if it's a lie. If Witkoff and Kirshner are spotted, on a beach in the Bahamas when they're supposed to be negotiating with Iranians, it's going to be picked up and it'll be covered. So it would not be in Trump's interest to lie about this. So, but Trump does fly off the cuff about things sometimes. He just says the most outlandish things. So I believe there probably are talks ongoing, and the Iranians, disinformation is their middle name. So I don't believe the Iranians. I'll believe the Trump administration at this stage.
But this was not the first time that a claim by President Trump has been belied by the actual situation on the ground, Chris.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, he said that the war is all but over, but we're still pounding Iran. So, I mean, but I think that comments like that are coming from someone that's not a geopolitical military strategist and, put his mouth out in front of the facts, because he's probably been briefed that, we can wrap this up in the next number of days. So he says it's all but over. But unfortunately, that comes across to the viewing public as, well, the war ends tomorrow, which is ludicrous. And so I really don't think it's a good idea for him to say things like that. It's best just to leave that off the table. But your point is well taken.
Chris, in which ways would you as a military man say America or Trump has miscalculated during this war? Because it doesn't seem to be going exactly according to plan.
Well, the one way I think that they miscalculated, and I don't know that they underestimated, but from the outside looking in, because of course I'm not inside the wire anymore. I used to be for decades. But at this stage, from outside the wire looking in, one could point to the fact that the Iranians have proven to be quite resilient, particularly with their drone strikes, and they still have missiles on hand, even though they've lost a lot of missiles and they fired quite a few. So that resilience may have been a bit surprising, but I think the one thing that maybe they underestimated is the willingness of Iran to target civilians in neighboring countries and commit crimes against humanity. I don't know if they thought that Iran would do that. Certainly, they knew that their bases would come under attack. But the bases haven't been the main targets. The main targets have been the civilian infrastructure and effort to disrupt the energy markets of the world, which is kind of stupid because it goes against Iran's own interests. But we're not dealing with rational actors here. And many of the heads of the snake have been cut off now. Medusa is running out of heads. So who knows who's running Iran? But people keep saying, analysts that is, and the media keep talking about how this war is going poorly and the U.S. is underestimated. I don't see that as of this stage. Remember, at the outset of this, I said this would go on for at least 6 weeks. Then Trump announced he wanted unconditional surrender, which at this point I think was really just a ploy. But when he said that, I expanded my analysis to 8 weeks because he's not going to get it in 6 weeks. So the bottom line, what people need to remember on this is that at the 60-day mark, Trump loses the ability legally to engage the Iranians in a military conflict without consensus from, or at least approval from Congress. The War Powers Act of the 1970s is what allows him to do the attack, despite what the Democrats in America say. Like, he doesn't have authority. Of course he has authority. That's what the law said. You clowns came up with this in the 1970s to limit the power of the president, and it's backfired on you. Now any president can launch any military attack they want at any time without any questions. They just have to inform you within 48 hours and give you a timeline of when they expect it to be over. And they get 60 days before they have to get congressional approval. So that clock is ticking, and I've not heard a single analyst on the planet talk about this. I've talked about it repeatedly. That he gets 2 months essentially to get this done. Also, remember that it's the Middle East. It's hot, and we have weapon systems and missiles and guidance systems and radars that are deeply affected by the high temperatures, which will get in the 40s and up to the 50s in parts of that area, including the Arabian Peninsula. And at some stage, by the time we start getting into May, it becomes very difficult to fight a conflict in that region with high tech. So that does become a problem. So I believe that this thing, if it's going to be wrapped up, will be wrapped up at the timeline originally said. And I don't think it's going badly at all for the U.S. Maybe the Israelis underestimated their ability or overestimated their ability to intercept Iranian missiles. I think that may be a mistake or a misunderstanding because we've had far more casualties in Israel. Of course, these are civilian targets by and large being attacked. These are crimes against humanity. There's no basis to attack these civilian targets. And the Iranians should be, after this war, they should be rounded up, those who are still alive and responsible for this, and should be put on trial and deal with this sort of thing because these are crimes against humanity. But I think maybe Israel probably didn't see Iran being this successful. But then, look, I mean, you could put the best air defense system in the world up, the Iron Dome, but if you fire 1,000 missiles, some are going to get through. You just can't stop all of them. So I think that's where the Israelis made a mistake.
And one got through again today. I think there seems to have been casualties in another missile attack on Tel Aviv. That's
correct. And there was a one the previous day that I think injured 160 people, which is shocking. But obviously, if you're hitting 160 people, you saw where the blast was. It was a residential building, once again, targeting civilians.
Talking about crimes against humanity, let's go to that school attack in Iran. Chris, you and I have spoken about it and how the U.S. mishandled the news.
Indeed. That's what I said from the outset. First, one of the problems with that, it's interesting because I'm often attacked by people that are just, they're keyboard warriors, people that are really idiots, have no substance to their ability to rationally think. And they claim I never criticized the Trump administration. I'm sort of MAGA guy, and that's far from the truth. I hold everybody to account. It's just that the Trump administration tends to be right far more often than any other administrations, and they just can't see that. But in this case, the Trump administration was wrong. And I said so. I said, this something's not right here. And the two problems with this were, first off, the denial that it was three actually. Denial that it was the U.S. when they didn't know. They should say, we'll look into this investigation. The school is located directly on a naval-based compound that's been there for decades. And we'll look into this, investigate, and see if, in fact, we did hit that school. That should have been the response. That wasn't the response. They said, the Iranians fired on their own base by mistake. That's the sort of mistake in the fog of war that shouldn't happen. We should have people better polished to speak to the public when that question comes up. I mean, I do a course where I work with the Army War College, and that's one of the things we address. What happens when missiles or rockets land in a place and kill civilians by mistake? And then, of course, sometimes it's a false flag. Sometimes it's your fault. What's your response? And we work with general officers to explain to them, what you have to do is the following. You don't know the facts. So don't overstate, don't mislead. And that's what happened here. And I think that was a grave mistake on the part of the United States because it undermined credibility. And then President Trump foolishly in a press conference said, lots of countries have Tomahawks. No, they don't. No, they don't. The United States, the UK, and Australia have Tomahawks. That's it. Japan and Canada are in the process of buying Tomahawks, but they don't have them yet. And the Netherlands as well. But that clearly was a U.S. missile. They pulled the data panels off of it, said we're showing where it was manufactured parts in Ohio at a factory. I mean, that's not a good look, and it was a mistake. It's beyond tragic that these children were killed, but the reason they were killed, the proximate cause, in my view, is because the Iranians put them in harm's way. They put a school in a military building and then put the fence around part of it, but kept the compound still connected to a naval base. I mean, we're talking about not a kilometer, but a dozen meters away from where military were. This was intentional. The problem here is that, in my view, the targeting data must not have been updated by the U.S. military, and they had bad information. This is a failure of leadership. This is a failure of the folks involved, and they should just admit that and be honest about it. I mean, credibility is the one thing that is almost impossible to get back, and you squander your credibility by being dishonest or misleading people. If you don't know, you say, we do not know, we're investigating, and we expect hopefully have an answer for you by this time, as honest as you can be. That's what needs to be done, especially in a conflict, because things can turn against you so quickly. You already know that if you're in the U.S. government, that the press is going to be hostile to you, even if you cure cancer tomorrow. Trump could come out and there'd be no more case of cancer. He'd be the greatest humanitarian in history, and he'd still be accused of colluding with Russia, which was proven to be a total hoax. And of course, even Robert Mueller, who, after wasting $25 million, said as much, he just passed away this week at the age of 84. But, it doesn't matter what you do. You're going to be under attack from the media and under scrutiny. And to be fair, government should be under attack and under scrutiny, despite what Fikile Mbalula seems to think, that people are treasonous if they speak out against the South African government. No, they're not. And South Africa's Section 16 of the Bill of Rights guarantees that right to free speech and the right to criticize the government. And people should be able to criticize our government and question it, particularly when something smells rotten. And this attack smelled rotten.
Indeed. Chris, what is happening with President Trump's popularity? I think I saw a low 15% somewhere. I don't know if that's correct.
No, I haven't seen that. I don't really pay attention to polls, but I do see them because they're constantly promoted in the press. I don't really spend time looking for them. I've seen polls saying he's at 39%, polls saying he's at 43%, polls saying that he's hold steady. Also, initially, there were several polls that came out to claim that 2/3 of Americans oppose this conflict. But within a week, it was pretty clear that that was bogus, and that more people support the conflict than do not support it. But it's not a wide number. I mean, it's probably around 53, 54% in favor of it. But the problem is that the world doesn't know just how dangerous Iran is. This regime is out of control. And what I find fascinating is that they just murdered 30,000 of their own citizens who were peacefully protesting, just gunned them down, threw grenades into crowds and butchered people, went on and executed people who were wounded in the streets. And where's the outrage over this? Where's the shock? This is not exactly, we're not talking about we've gone in, we've attacked the Vatican, where the Swiss Guard are really nice people and they're protecting the Pope. This is a really nasty regime and look what it's doing to the neighbors. None of these neighbors should be attacked. They're all being attacked. And if you're going to attack them, the attack should be limited to where the U.S. forces are, not to civilians. So, Trump's popularity seems to be okay at the moment.
If Trump ends the war at the 2-month mark, what would he have achieved?
Well, if we can believe the U.S. government, and, maybe questions about credibility here by some circles, but if we can believe the U.S. government, well, we actually don't have to believe the U.S. government. We can look in the Arabian Gulf and see the remnants of the Iranian Navy sitting at the bottom of the Arabian Gulf and one of their ships sitting in the bottom of the Indian Ocean. There is no Arabian Navy. The Iranian missile capability is dramatically degraded. I don't know the numbers, but I would estimate at least 70% of the missiles must be expended or destroyed at this point, if not more. And they have decapitated the leadership. But the thing about this is that air power doesn't win wars, Chris. That's been a myth for decades. That was a big strategic philosophy by air proponents in the 1920s and 30s. You don't need ground troops. Air power will win the war. Unfortunately, the reality is that if you want to make change, someone has to occupy the ground, and that falls to the infantry or armor, whichever the case is. We're not deploying troops. So what happens in Iran is the question. Unless the Iranian people rise up and round up these nasty people or overthrow them and institute their own government, the Iranian regime will survive in some form. That's the challenge. Now, regime change wasn't a stated goal at the outset, but it was implied. So where does that leave us? I think in the end, if Iran's ability to enrich uranium, which, by the way, they boasted about when they negotiated in Oman, people like they're not a threat. Well, they said they had 435 kgs kilograms of uranium at 60%, and they can enrich it to 90% for weapons grade within 2 weeks. Well, if they were telling the truth, which the intelligence communities, not just the U.S., are claiming is true, then they could have had a nuclear weapon in less than a month, which they could have launched against Israel, most likely, and maybe Saudi Arabia. And we would have had carnage, unimaginable carnage, not seen since, well, never seen, because these weapons are much more powerful than Hiroshima or Nagasaki. So that capability has been degraded or destroyed. We don't know where that uranium is, to my knowledge, and we've got to find it. That's a problem. So if this regime stays, they'll take that uranium, they'll pull it out of some place if they can, they'll start trying to enrich it again, and the threat will remain. The thing that's a problem for them is that many of their top scientists are dead now as a consequence of this. The Israelis have been targeting their top scientists. So at the end of the day, Iran will be defanged, at least temporarily, and maybe they'll be set back 3 to 5 years. Maybe. It's hard to say without actually having a measle board and checking off all the actors that are missing, all the things that have been destroyed. We don't know. There is a censorship blackout in Iran, so it's hard to say what's going on. All we have basically for Iran is 2CTV, the Iranian exile who lives in the UK, and of course, CENTCOM, Central Command's footage that they show us in their briefings. So we won't really know until after it ends and people are on the ground. Journalists can go in, people can go in and see what's actually going on. The censorship gets lifted. And by the same token, we don't know how bad things are in Israel because there's a massive censorship taking place there as well. And that's unfortunate because, as I said at the outset of this conversation, the first casualty of war is the truth. And if you have censorship, then it's hard to find the truth. So I think that at the end of this, we're probably going to see that Iran won't be a threat to global security and will be a much smaller threat and menace to its neighbors for 3 to 5 years. But if this regime doesn't go, they'll simply restart all over again. And that means that Trump will accomplish defanging them, but not destroying them. And once he's out of office, this will be someone else's problem. That's my concern.
Thank you. That was U.S. intelligence analyst, retired Colonel Chris Wyatt. Speaking to Best News, I'm Chris Steyn. Thank you, Chris.
Well, thank you, Chris. Let's see what happens. I know people are paying attention to what's happening in the Gulf. It has a dramatic impact on South Africa. The country is about to run out of fuel, apparently. Where are they going to get petrol? Where are they going to get diesel? Prices already soaring. And pretty soon the entire economy may grind to a halt. Those people who want to go from Joburg to Cape Town may have to start walking through the Karoo. I mean, I don't mean to embellish a little bit, but that is the future if this conflict doesn't end in the time frame I've discussed. Take care.